This video is chapter 5 of 5 of a special interview series I've put together on the life and achievements of MSR founder Mr. Larry Penberthy, told from the perspective of Larry's 3 surviving daughters, Laura, Doris, and Louise. For more interesting MSR and Larry Penberthy history, make sure to check out the other videos in this series.
I sent you Father Papa's University of Washington transcript and 1 year's worth of school that he did there as a graduate student, though from what the registrar said, no degree area was ever identified and no degree was awarded from that educational work. And that was 1937 and 1938. So Doris commented that we're not quite sure what he did after graduation from the College of Puget Sound in 1936 to then starting at the UW in the fall of 37. But if his parents were in Randall at that time, running the general store, if I recall correctly, he may have just gone back to Randall and lived there and helped out in the store and done probably whatever he could do to earn any money he could to then be able to go back to school and pursue additional education. So those classes are recorded there on that transcript. And then he left the UW at that point in 1938, and that's when he went to Holden, because Holden had started to ship copper ore out of their mine 11 miles away from Lake Chelan. And they'd started to ship it from the town of Chelan at the south end of the lake to Tacoma, because that's where the smelter was. So Father Papa had a friend in Tacoma who'd heard that there were jobs at Holden because the mine there was finally underway. The copper ore had been discovered in Copper Mountain decades earlier, but the area is so remote, they were having a hard time out how to get the copper ore out of there. And it wasn't until truck technology developed that they were able to do that. The initial idea was to build a railroad of some kind from the mine area down to Lake Chelan, and that never really materialized. But then in the 1930s, once trucks were working well enough to be able to do that, then that's what they used. And there's a road from the town of Holden down to Lake Chelan. So then Father Papa, and I think this story is one that he tells in the University of Washington oral history. He hitchhiked north to, I believe, Darrington, and hiked over the North Cascades, sleeping out overnight, 1 or 2 nights, to get to Holden. And because their hiring office was in the town of Chelan at the south end of the lake, so he figured if he just showed up at Holden, they'd have to hire him because he was there anyhow. And he had a friend who was working there at the time. So when he arrived, walking into Holden Village, just met up with his friend who said, "Okay, great, you're here. Just get in line with me at the dining hall for dinner." And here you are. They were just finishing the buildings that were the dormitories for the mine workers. And since Father Papa knew electrical work, he was hired as an electrician to help finish the buildings. Then they had to go from 2 12-hour shifts a day to 3 8-hour shifts a day for the workers. And they needed another person who knew chemistry to work in the assay office for the mine. So that's how he ended up being hired into that job and worked there until 1940. And then the war effort was underway enough that he could get a job elsewhere. And that's when he left Holden and went to New York State. Because of his interest in photography, he took photos around Holden of the mine and the mill and the town that are the best photographic record of Holden from that era. The mine continued until 1957. It was the largest supplier of copper during World War II in the United States because it was hard to get war material supplies from overseas because of the war. By 1957, they had mined out all the copper ore that was easily available, and so the mine closed. And a few years later, it was sold to the Lutheran Church, and they started a retreat center there, which continues to this day. And probably more people have participated with the Holden Village Retreat Center than ever were a part of the Holden mine. But it has this wonderful ongoing life and then this very rich, vibrant history too. Since Holden Mine was in business for about 20 years, there's a lot of people who lived there as children, and to them, Holden is home. So those families would have reunions in Chelan every summer, beginning right after the mine closed. And then after a while, they had those reunions at Holden. And Father Papa and our mother went to some of those reunions. Mm-hmm. Father Papa still had all his negatives of his photos he had taken, and then small sample prints of each one. And they were pretty nicely organized. A print was stapled into a page of a black paper photo album, and then the negative in its little sleeve was behind that photo. And those photo albums were on the bookshelves in the living room of the house that we grew up in. So I remember seeing them as a child, and then later on learned what they really were. Father Papa and our mother went to a few of those reunions in the 90s at Holden. And Papa got some of the photos. He went through his albums, made a selection of photos, had them copied onto slides, and created a slideshow to show at Holden. Then he recorded his narration of his own slideshow. And years later, after he had passed away, a couple people who volunteer with Holden they digitized all those images from the original negatives and put the slideshow together with, I had a copy of the recording on a small format cassette tape. And I found a cassette tape player that held that size of cassettes.
Oh, the minis.
Yeah, the mini cassettes. They were developed, I think, partly as a dictation machine for office work.
Yeah.
But it just turns out that that's what he had used to make his recording of his narration of the slideshow. In the office I was working in some years earlier, someone had bought one of those small format cassette tape recorders, and it was in a cupboard. So I just borrowed it and gave it to the guys who were doing the digitization. And so they were able to use that tape deck to play that tape and convert it to an electronic file. And then the only trick was to figure out how fast the narration recording should play so that it really sounded like his voice. It took them a couple tries to get the speed exactly right, but they did get it. And then it's simple to take the digitized photos, because we knew he had recorded which pictures they were and which order they went in, set those up, and then set the timing so that the timing of the viewing of the images exactly matched their narration. That part's really simple. So they put it onto a CD so that they could then sell CDs as a fundraiser for Holden Minor heritage programs. And I've been to Holden a couple of times, and I went, I think it was in 2008, because the reunions were about every 5 years, and they were going to have one in 2007 for the 50th anniversary of the closing of the mine. But there was a fire. The Domkey Lake fire was that. Yeah. So the reunion was postponed till the following year, and I went to the reunion. And we were sitting in the Koinonia Lounge watching the slideshow with Father Papa's voice as the narration off of a copy of the CD. And there was a lot of interest, not only in the reunion attendees who were all there, but quite a few of the Holden staff wanted to watch the slideshow also because it was the history. So we're watching this wonderful slideshow presentation, and all of a sudden there's the sound of a fire siren. And the Holden staff, because they're so practiced at firefighting training in Holden, because it's such a threat to Holden out there by itself in the North Cascades, they all leapt out of their chairs and headed for the door. And then the fire siren sound stopped, and someone said, "I think it's on the CD." And it was, because Father Papa, sitting in his big chair in the living room on Admiral Way, recording his narration, had a fire truck go down the street on Admiral Way outside the house, and the sound recorded into the narration, and you can hear it in the sound on the CD. So there we were at Holden, listening to a fire siren that had been recorded from the street on Admiral Way in West Seattle. And everybody went, "Oh, okay, that's fine. It's on just on the CD," and sat down again and continued to watch the rest. So it was a delightful reunion. I had a great time. So that's the reunion story. I'll pause there. I have one more Holden story, but I'll pause right there for Louise and Doris to contribute, because Louise put Domkey Lake. Domkey Lake is a little lake that is down closer to Lake Chelan.
Yeah, I put the spelling in the chat because when I first heard about it on the news, I thought they were saying donkey. Donkey like a mule or that kind of creature. No, it's spelled Domkey, Domke. Yeah, Admiral Way was an arterial, and a lot of emergency trucks and vehicles would go down Admiral Way to get to various parts of West Seattle over there. So sirens going by our house was reasonably common.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So then in the late 90s, Father Papa put together the best photos into this book, self-published, found a publisher to print it up for him. And it's got great photos. I know you can't see this really well, but that's him. That's Father Papa taking a sample from the iron ore in that says, "Sampling the froth of the flotation cell to assay for copper."
Did I tell the story about how he got so he could do his 8-hour shift each round very fast, and he could catnap in between rounds? He had to do like 4. And then, so he'd have time for the rest of the time to go hiking, climbing up Bonanza and various peaks. And I recall that he said that one time he slipped through a round because they couldn't fire him because he was Secretary of the Union or something like that.
That is the story that I heard. The job of whoever was on duty for the assay office had to take samples every 2 hours and test them. Yeah. And he figured out how to do the whole sampling and testing process in 29 minutes, including cleanup. So then he could have the extra hour and a half till the next sample to nap. And then when he wasn't working, because he'd go to work at the assay office and drop his pack outside the fence, do his 8-hour shift. They'll go pick up his pack and go hiking after his shift was done.
Yeah.
So he'd use some of the extra time while on duty to catch up on some sleep.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So he put together this book, and he thought, oh, they can sell this on the boat that goes up and down Lake Chelan, the Lady of the Lake, and they can sell this in the gift shop at Holden, and maybe they can sell it a couple other places too. And Holden bought quite a few copies from him, and they do carry it in their bookstore. He would have liked for them to have bought lots more copies because that was later in his life and he felt like he needed a little bit more money. So he had probably far more copies printed than he really should have. And they ended up with me and they're in my storage unit. And fortunately in 2019, I was able to donate several hundred of them to the Holden archivist who thought of a lot of ways that they could use them as part of the ongoing Holden community, especially to raise money for a new museum and archives at Holden, because they had been using a small building that was on the site of where the assay office was by what was left of the mill building. But then with all the remediation of the tailings, they had to take that little building down and were not allowed to rebuild on that site. So they needed to build a whole new museum and archives building. And I think that effort is still underway at Holden. It's just been very slow. I don't think that that's been completed yet. So I have quite a few of these books. They're really very interesting. Pardon me?
Would it be all right if I include some of the imagery in the final editing of this video series?
Yes, that would be fine. And when you get to the Holden part of the story, because Father Papa had a relatively long life and was very active for most of it. So there's a lot of stories to tell about his life. But when you get to the Holden Village part, this is a good resource, and all of his photos have been digitized, so you're not limited to the ones that were used in the book. And I have copies of those. I know Bill Phillips does also, so we can get those to you. So there's additional resources about Holden in addition to just this book. But we'll start with just the book. But yes, that it's nice to have the Holden images be used. They were used, a few of them, as an addendum to a history report that was a requirement, because when the mine remediation was done, they took down what was left of the mill building, and it was a historic structure. So the company that did that work had to file, was that under the USGS, US Geological Survey auspices? I forget if it was them or the Forest Service, but they had to file a report of what was taken down. And some of his images were used to illustrate that as an addendum to that report. Then the House Sound Mining Company that ran the mine at Holden ran another mine at Britannia Beach in British Columbia. And that body of water right there is called House Sound, and that's why the mining company is called that. So the mining company had those two mines going at pretty much at the same time, I think. And the layout at Britannia Beach is significantly different than at Holden. For one thing, it is actually on the beach, on House Sound is where the main town for Britannia Beach is. And instead of creating tailings piles that were just huge mountains of tailings, which is what happened at Holden, at Britannia Beach, they just pushed the tailings into the water. Ooh. So it ended up creating, not the best idea ecologically, but what ended up happening is it extended the land along that section of the shoreline. And if you drive from Vancouver to BC to Whistler, BC, you're driving at one section of the road, you're driving over tailings from the Britannia Beach mine. So that road goes right by Britannia Beach. And I've been there once, and you just drive off the highway and you're right there at the parking lot, and they've got quite a few buildings from their town left. But what Britannia Beach has that Holden does not is they have a little section of their original mine that's set up for visitor tours. You can go in there on a guided tour, and it's fascinating. At Holden, the mine is still there, all filled up with water up to the main portal, and you're not allowed to go anywhere near it. But at Britannia Beach, you can go in. And they still have most of their mill building there. And at the time I was there, you could go in the mill building. And I asked them, do you want to carry this book in your bookstore? And they said, well, no, that's not really quite in our arena. But then they contacted me later and said, we're thinking about doing a kind of a multimedia presentation inside our mill. And if we do that, can we use your pictures? Because they're the best illustration of what their mill building would have looked like when it was in operation. And I said, sure, that'd be fine. That's an appropriate use of those images. But they didn't follow up, so I don't know if they ever did that project. They were looking for ways to enhance what was a working mine for decades, some of it right there at the beach and some of it way uphill in a different location. That now is essentially a roadside attraction, but it's the best combination of a genuine historical site and a roadside attraction, which if you're on that highway, you can stop for a few minutes. So I hope it would be lovely if that worked out for them someday and they wanted to use these images, because it would be nice to have them used in that arena also.
Yeah. This is a little bit tangential, but you call him Father Papa, and I think you mentioned it briefly, but is there any particular reason, or is there a culture that's associated with, or did you have a similar name for your mothers as well then, or?
No, it's just because Doris called him Father and we called him Papa.
Oh.
And when we were planning for his, we didn't have a memorial service after he passed, but my husband had an open house in our condo. So we were thinking of all the different ways that people referred to him. So we used to call him Father, Papa, Grandpa Larry. Okay. Because Doris called him Father. Laura and I called him Papa. Doris's daughters called him Grandpa. And then I imagine George, Doris's husband, called him Larry. So we used to say Father, Papa, Grandpa Larry. Father, Papa, Grandpa Larry. In that context. But now we just say Father, Papa because of... I actually remember a story, Doris, so you can tell me if this is correct. When you brought George to the house on Admiral Way for everybody to meet George, as I recall, they were playing some kind of game where, what was it that Papa was holding a wastebasket and everybody was taking turns throwing a crumpled ball of paper into the wastebasket. But every time George went for it, Papa Father would move the wastebasket out of the way. Oh, gosh darn, George, you missed. And George, being good natured, just laughed. Does anybody else remember this?
I don't remember it, but it sure sounds like something he would do.
Just a gentle kind of teasing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And to, in a weird way, make somebody feel welcome. But
So
anyhow,
carrying furniture down to the basement.
Oh yeah, we told that story, right?
Yeah.
Didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the one where our Papa, Father, and Laura's and my mom had just moved into an apartment, and when Laura's then husband Andrew and my now husband Kyle came over for Thanksgiving, they said, "Oh, come move furniture." So they moved furniture downstairs, which was
interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I actually have nearby some photos from. Did we talk about how they used Papa, Father, and Laura's and my mother used to take trips on a houseboat in Lake Mead?
Oh,
I don't think so.
Oh, so
I went on one of those.
did you?
Yep.
Oh, okay. I only went on one of them myself, but it would be a different one, I guess.
Well, me and George and Sharon and Catherine all went. I can't remember if Sharon or Catherine. One or the other got caught in the mud. It was a little traumatic.
Oh dear.
But okay. But yeah, it was an interesting thing to do that they did, to go on those.
Yeah, they'd rent a houseboat like for a week on Lake Mead, which is behind Hoover Dam, which I imagine, given the drought that's been happening in the Southwest and in the United States, looks a great deal different. But they just get a houseboat and go sailing around the houseboat for a week. And so this is a photo of Papa Father. Sorry for the glare. He seems to be operating some kind of radio. On the houseboat. And
that is the houseboat.
Yeah, that's on the houseboat. I'll see if I can. Oh, here's a good photo of the houseboat, I think. So this is what they would look like. Sorry for the glare. I can't seem to get rid of it.
Wow.
And this is a trip that Papa Father and our mother, Laura's and my mother, took with some people called Whitaker. Not spelled the same as the mountaineers, as the mountain climbers. So we don't know who those people are, but that would be the houseboat. And then this is a picture of Papa Father and our mother looking
young.
I know, isn't it crazy? Our mother still had dark hair. Oh boy, that reminds me of one time when Kyle and I went over to the apartment. This is early in Kyle's and my relationship. And I went up to Mama and said, "Oh, Mama, I have gray hair coming in." And she, of course, had lots of gray hair, but she had some dark hair. So Kyle went over to her and picked up a lock of her hair and said, "Oh, Mama gorgeous, you have dark hair coming in." That might have been after Papa Father had passed, so I don't know what his reaction would have been to that, but I think he would have been amused.
Like back to the Holden conversation. Are any of you aware that there's a book about company towns, meaning, and that Holden is one of the chapters in there. And then somewhere there's an article that is just about Holden, and it says something like from company town to company town, because of the fact that it went from house sound ownership and then went through the whole thing, and then ended up being sort of a company town of the Lutheran Church. Have you seen that article?
I think I'm going to leave the camera for a moment because I believe I have a copy of that book, Company Towns, and I also have some of those Mars books and the Edgar Rice Burroughs books.
Yeah,
so I can show it. So I'll be right back. I can still hear you, but I will be out of view.
Okay, well then I have one piece of the story of the Company Towns book, because that was written by Linda Carlson and published by University of Washington Press. And she's a local Seattle area historian. And she had started researching that area of company towns in the Pacific Northwest. She knew about Holden. I think it was someone with Holden who put her in touch with me because our father's pictures are some of the best ones. So I talked with her, let her look through all the pictures. She selected the ones that she wanted to use. So she was and this was some years ago. So our mother was still alive. So Linda Carlson had all the appropriate permissions to use the photos. And I think her original plan for the book was that each chapter was going to be about a different town. And then as her research continued and her planning for the structure of the book, she changed it so that each chapter is about a different aspect of company town life. And one of the reasons for that was the Holden pictures that our father took were the best photographic record of any of the towns that were going to be included in the book. So she didn't want to have a chapter on Holden that was the only one that had any good pictures. There's pictures throughout the book of Holden, used as a representation of that aspect of company town life, even though the chapter describes what that was like in all the different towns. And I saw her at Holden in 2017. That was the most recent time that I was there. And I hadn't seen her in years, but went up and said hello, and we had a nice chat. And so her book is one of the ways that the history of Holden has been recorded and is still available for our modern readers. And it's nice to have it included in that context. So, Louise, do you have a copy of the Company Town book? There it is.
It does not, as far as I can tell, have an index of photos. So I'm just going through the, and of course, as Laura just alluded to, the material about Holden is scattered throughout the book. So I'm just paging through but while I do that, I can also show, so we talked about Tarzan of the Apes.
Yeah, yes.
So Doris mentioned these earlier. I read these, the Tarzan of the Apes books, the Mars books, and I don't know, Laura, if you liked them as much as I did, but I certainly read them. And so this says, in his handwriting, it says, it is apparently used because there's somebody else's, Llewellyn Jones. I don't know who he is, but Larry Penberthy, 2317 47th Southwest.
You got those books, okay? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and this is, it's the kind of thing that it was typical, I think, probably of like, late 1900s, early 1920s. Like 1910s, 1920s kind of artistic sensibilities. And of course, the stories are dreadful now. I mean, you just, Penberthy published in 1914. The stories are now just dreadful, very paternalistic and full of white supremacy and all that kind of crap. I mean, the hero of the Mars stories is John Carter, who was a disaffected Confederate soldier who longed for the days of the Confederacy. And so that's the whole thing. I don't think that's why. Anyhow, I don't think our Papa, would have noticed that or bought them because of that. Of course not. But anyhow, I still have those, and I liked reading them. That's not one of Papa's. Okay, so why don't you go ahead, and if somebody has something more to say, I can listen, but I'm also looking for some of Papa Father's interesting photos.
Sure. I'm not sure if you guys have the clock, but we've got 6 minutes left on this one. So,
well, I can show you one. This is somebody in the dentist's chair at Holden, and our father took that.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
Very specific.
Yes. Yeah, he took a lot of, as Laura said.
Can I ask? Well, just kind of mentioning an observation. It sounds like a lot of we haven't discussed your mother's really much at all, but at least a lot of Larry lives on in Newall in terms of values, and obviously you said you value education and literature and that sort of thing. It's pretty cool, for lack of a bit of a term. But what do you think? Given it seemed like though he was strong-willed, he also seemed quite like humble, So what do you think he would actually think about people doing interviews and making kind of like documentary content, based on his life's work?
He would love it, and he would start telling you what to include.
Yes.
And he'd bring up some specific points that he wanted to make sure that you made in the videos. He'd say, be sure and talk about this, and then be sure and talk about that. And that's what I think that he would say.
Okay. Is there anything that you feel he would want us to discuss that we haven't discussed yet?
The one item that comes to mind that I'm hoping to get you more information on is mountain sickness type R. because I think that I have one of the original printed pamphlets of acute mountain sickness type R. And I think I know where it is, but that doesn't mean that I could find it very easily. So I'm hoping that I come across it in the not too distant future, because that is something that I think we've talked about the basic idea of that, but I think that that is something he would want us to talk about more.
Yeah, absolutely. But kind of based on the interview and when I've read it, it seemed like it was a unfinished goal that he had.